Oh, well done. Good. Yes. Okay. So yeah, so Michael Kearney, welcome. Michael is a recently retired hospice and palliative care consultant who's worked with Cicely Saunders and Balfour Mount, who are both pioneers in the movement of hospice and palliative care. And when I was still working at Arthur Rank, I read his books, which really moved and inspired me. The Mortally Wounded, A Place of Healing, and A Nest in the Stream. Michael offers a whole person psycho-spiritual model of care, which he's built up out of his own professional and personal experience, as well as what he's learned from nature and his involvement in Buddhist and Native American traditions. So it's a very rich base on which he can draw. He's developed deep listening techniques to respond to people's existential distress when they live with a serious illness or are at end of life. And he will talk about how our interconnectedness with nature and having a real sense of that can help us both support ourselves, but also increase our capacity to be with the pain of other people. And over time, Michael is moving more in the direction of environmental challenges and how we can respond to those, and young people, how we can support the younger generation in living in the face of what is a very dire situation for our world. And that comes out more in his recent book, Becoming Forest, and a project that he has set up, which he'll talk to us about, which teaches us deep resilience. So Michael is going to talk for about 40 minutes. There'll then be a 10-minute guided practice, and then we'll have about 15 minutes to be in small groups, and we can just talk among ourselves and what it is evoked in us, any ideas that we have around this. And then we'll come back into the big meeting for another 25 minutes or so for general. You can ask Michael questions. If you have any questions, you can also put them in the chat. And also we can just have a general discussion and you can share your thoughts. I think that's all I have to say at the moment. So, Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Jeanette, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It's very early morning where I am at the moment, but lovely to be here. And thank you, Jeanette, so much for this invitation to be with you all. And it just it sounds like such a wonderful initiative that you're all part of in the trauma-informed palliative care group. Thank you for being here and for being here, and I am delighted to be here. I'm going to just get right into my talk. So I'm going to share my screen. I've prepared some PowerPoints. So let me go there. Okay. So as Jeanette said, my interest sort of is rippling out from the bedside in kind of wider circles, and I'll say more about that in my talk. And I've also been for some time prompted in large part by my own experience of burnout, sort of mid-career, in the whole area of self-care and resilience. So I'll be talking about that as well. As Jeanette said, I was lucky enough to work with Cicely Saunders. I'm the bearded figure on the left of the picture. I hope you can see it okay. If you can't see it, Jeanette, just come in and let me know.
I can see this fine.
Yeah. You can see it fine. Good.
Yeah. And if everyone can mute themselves, that would be great as well.
Oh yeah, that would be good. Dame Cicely is the lady in the middle with the glasses. I was lucky enough to work with her at St. Christopher's in the early 80s. I was there for 10 years. And that was just such a wonderful opportunity. And I was also very lucky to meet and work with Balfour Mount. In fact, the first time I met Balfour Mount, who you see on the right here, was in 1975, when I was doing a 1 week multidisciplinary training at St. Christopher's. I was still a medical student at that time. I graduated in 1977, but I was there as a disillusioned medical student, I might say, and thinking of leaving medicine because I was so disappointed with what I saw, but also more a sense that it just wasn't for me. But that week at St. Christopher's changed everything. And at the end of that week, we all had an opportunity to meet Dame Cicely in her office. And when I knocked on the door and she said, "Come in," there was a young, this is 10 years later, or whatever, 13 years later, there was a young man standing there in a blazer and shirt and tie, and she introduced me to Professor Balfour Mount, who had come over from the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal because he was interested in what was happening at St. Christopher's, and he wanted to bring it back into the acute medical system. And so he went back and started the team at the Royal Vic, and he called it palliative care. And that was the first hospital-based palliative care team. And so I was a close colleague and friend of Bal, and still am, and I've just come back from spending a few days with him up in Montreal a couple of weeks ago. So in 2008, Bal, Mount, myself, and a group of others published a paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association on self-care of physicians caring for patients at the end of life. And what we were proposing in our paper was that if we combined mindfulness, as we learned through mindfulness practice, mindfulness meditation, but reflective journaling, peer group supervision, if we combine that mindful awareness and self-awareness with our usual self-care strategies of kind of good professional boundaries and time out for regeneration and renewal, if we combine those three things together, it's much more effective as a mode of self-care. And at that time, I was practicing all three, if you like, I was traditional self-care in the usual way we think about it, but I was also practicing mindfulness. And so I was practicing what we were preaching here. But as I sat the night before I sent in the final edits, I was going through one last time the symptoms of burnout, that overwhelming sense of physical and emotional exhaustion, that sense of depersonalization, maybe slight dissociation in the workplace, and a sense of lack of personal accomplishment, never quite reaching my goal in the quality of care I was offering, that kind of sense of constantly missing the mark. As I was kind of going through those symptoms one last time, the light went on that actually I was experiencing all three, that I was burned out. And it really confused me, hence the exclamation mark at the end, because I was practicing what I was preaching. And it really can pose the question why this was happening, how this had happened, and why this was happening if I was actually, doing my best to practice self-care, to kind of mitigate occupational stress in the best way I could. Why was it happening? And as I reflected on this over time, I realized that it was because I hadn't really learned how to be with my own pain. I'd learned how to be with others' pain, at least to some extent, I kind of learned more what to do, how to help others in pain. Not a lot in medical school is about, one's quality of presence at the bedside. Like that's something I learned more um, from St. Christopher's and my early work in hospice. But so I learned how to be with others in their pain, but I hadn't really been paying attention to my own. Having said that, I had been in therapy for many years, had been also developing mindfulness practice. Um, so, there was a lot of self-reflection, a lot of processing, but somehow that wasn't enough to mitigate burnout. And what I realized, and I'll say more about it later, but in a language this group will understand, is that over the years, at that stage, I'd been working in hospice and palliative care for a little over 25 years. And that on a daily basis, I had been exposed to multiple micro traumas, and my self-diagnosis of my cause of burnout is that I was kind of suffering from chronic vicarious traumatization that had sort of just gone in below the radar. I hadn't even realized that my body, my soul had been impacted in the way it had been over time. And so really posed the question for me, was there a better way of being with pain, one that I clearly didn't know about? And around this time, I was living here in Santa Barbara in California at the time, and I organized a conference, a weekend retreat, a contemplative weekend called Silver Branch Perception. And this was a weekend with two Native American teachers, Wolf and Lisa Wapipa, a couple who are teachers of mine and friends of mine. And so this was just an extraordinary opportunity where they were willing to spend the weekend sharing their wisdom with a group of us in this amazing place called the Casa de Maria, which is a conference center. It's situated in the hills behind Santa Barbara under these old oak trees with a creek flowing through the grounds. And on one particular afternoon, I think it was the Saturday afternoon of the weekend, they gave us all an exercise, a practice, which was to really just spend a little time thinking about whatever deep question you're carrying in your heart at the moment, some unanswered question that you're carrying around with you these days, and go out onto the grounds of La Casa de Maria with that question, not thinking about it, but just holding it in your heart, and look around and wander until you find somewhere that kind of calls to you to spend some time, and just be there, and be there with beginner's mind, without expectations. Notice what you notice, and notice if anything comes towards you. And and that was the simple instruction we were given. So I participated in that. We were actually heading out for a little over 2 hours with this practice, and so wandered around the grounds, and I wandered over to the east side of the property where there was a creek with a stream flowing through. And I stood at the side of the creek, and there was a pool. The water was flowing in above and below, but right in front of me was a pool of still water, with the water flowing very gently through it. And I looked into the pool and I saw what you see here, this circular shape, which I recognized immediately as a bird's nest, very large bird's nest, which must have fallen from the sycamore trees that we can see reflected, in the water there. And it must have just fallen in because there were little threads at the edge and at the lower edge, kind of waving in the current. And as I watched closely, I could see that even though the water looked very still, it actually was flowing from left. That's left is upstream, and it was flowing across through the open weave of the nest into the central pool of the nest, and then flowing through the lower end of the nest, and flowing on downstream. And as I stood there, as I watched this, as I looked at this, I just felt a sort of a visceral resonance in my body. I didn't have any understanding, and I didn't actually at this time link it with my question: is there a better way of being with pain? But as I stood there, I could just feel that resonance, and words came, and the words that came were the loose and open weave of the heart. And this wasn't an auditory hallucination. It was more like something that I sort of felt heard in a heart sense within myself, the loose and open weave of the heart. And so our instruction was, at the end of that 2-hour period, we gathered in a circle under the oak trees with Wolf and Lisa. And I told the story as everyone told their story of what had happened, and shared that phrase. And it really was in the weeks and months afterwards that I realized, I put the two together and realized that what I was being offered here was the outline of another possible way of being with pain. And so thinking about it, and just kind of, as you'll see from my talk, I'm very much work with images and metaphors, and I kind of realized that there really are two ways of being with pain. There are probably many other ways besides, but I was being shown a second way. On the left was my usual default way of being with pain, like that rock. On the right was the nest. And so, as I say, this was my default. And the default is really what I might call here the way of the stone of being with pain. And if you think about, sticking with the stream, if you think about a stone in the stream, and if that stream is life, with all life brings towards us, all its joys, all its sorrows, all its pain, all its happiness. Well, if my heart is like that stone, then the water flows around it. I'm protected from the pain of what is carried towards me, of what I encounter. Sadly, it also means that I don't experience so much the joys that are also there, but it offers some real protection. And I think I offer this as a metaphor for what might be seen as our usual or traditional self-care strategies. And those are a combination of having good professional and personal boundaries. And maybe, in my case, don't wear a white coat anymore when I'm in the hospital, but just kind of one's work persona, whether it's a social worker, whether it's a physician, whether it's a chaplain, whether it's a nurse, our professional persona is itself a suit of armor of kind. It is protective of our human vulnerability. And obviously there are other boundaries, just like kind of taking time out and making sure we take our vacations, and so on. And the kind of other boundaries that come, more flexible boundaries that come with when we combine it with mindfulness, as I'll say in a moment. But so good boundaries combined with doing outside the workplace, are indeed within those kind of short moments, tea breaks, coffee breaks, lunch breaks, things within the workplace that we know that help us to relax and renew. So that combination of protective boundaries and then tapping into what gives us a sense of renewal that's traditional self-care. That's probably what most of us practice as our default mode of self-care, whether we're even aware of it or not. But if we combine this with mindful self-awareness, with a combination of self-knowledge and mindfulness, it really increases the protective potential, the mitigating from burnout potential of those practices. One of our authors on the paper, Richard Harrison, who's a clinical psychologist who works in Vancouver, coined the phrase exquisite empathy, and differentiates between, and he wrote a wonderful paper, and if anybody's interested on this, I will actually, come to think of it, his paper is extremely relevant for this group, because he worked with a number of trauma therapists who actually were identified by their colleagues as thriving in their workplace. And he interviewed them in this qualitative research project to identify, what were the protective practices that allowed them to work in a kind of a trauma kind of intense environment and yet thrive. And what he identified were, I think, 9 or 10 practices, one of which he called exquisite empathy. And exquisite empathy is, if you like, traditional, usual empathy, as in feeling for and with another, combined with self-awareness. And that allows us as clinicians to be highly present, sensitively attuned, finely boundaried, because that mindfulness brings the capacity of metacognition or meta-awareness, which allows us to be in a situation and at the same time, in real time, to be aware that we're in that situation and how we are experiencing it, how we are feeling, and allows us to move in closer or take a step back. So that combination of mindful self-awareness with the traditional boundaries and rest and relaxation is a very potent combination. And that's the way of the stone. And that is protective. Those practices act like a shield to protect us against what's coming towards us that's potentially painful, traumatic. The problem is, if these are our only ways of self-protection in a stressful situation, if that's our only, if that default is our only way of reacting and responding.
Okay, I want to thank you so much for joining the.
If that is our situation, then there is a danger over time of those mechanisms solidifying and ossifying, hence the way of the stone. And there's a tragedy in that, because while it's protective, then it's also disconnective, and it leaves us isolated. It leads to isolation, both of us in our little protected bubble, but also the other who we are present to and with, who is in pain and suffering. And they are alone in their pain and suffering. And so, lonely and afraid. And then on the other side of the shield, we are burned out, because we're not experiencing any of that kind of joy or that liveliness that would also be coming towards us, were we able somehow to be open to it. And that's what the way of the nest taught me and teaches me, is a way of being openness to whatever comes towards me in a way that is protective, but open. So let me say a little bit more about that and how that works. And as I kind of stood there looking at the nest, I noticed, as I say, that There was a very gentle flow. I could see tiny little particles of leaves, being carried from left across, through, out, the other side. I could see the flow of the current. The little leaves coming in on the left, the little threads weaving their tails on the right. So there was a flow through the nest. And then there was that central pool where the water kind of maybe for a moment lingered on its way through. And so if I was to imagine what the nest was saying to me about how to be with pain, it was to be open to the pain, to actually allow yourself to be open, and don't be afraid of the pain. As one of my teachers and mentors, Joanna Macy, puts it, our pain for another who is suffering, or for our world which is suffering, is actually a symptom of how deeply connected we are with the other. And by allowing ourselves to open and to experience and to feel, we actually come into a deeper felt sense of our connectedness. So don't be afraid, be open, and allow yourself to actually feel what you're feeling. Many of us can identify what we're feeling as we kind of notice it with our attention and our awareness. But I realize, certainly for myself, that I feel a lot, but I don't actually feel what I'm feeling. And I know you, as a group of social workers, will understand what I'm talking about and describing here. Actually allowing ourselves to experience what we're experiencing for just a few moments, but not holding on to it. We don't have to hold on to it. It's not about clinging to it. It's about opening to it. It's about allowing ourselves to experience it, but we don't have to hold on to it. It's not necessary to do so, because while the wound may be ours, a wound in our psyche, perhaps, the pain is energy, like the actual water in the stream. The pain is energy that actually doesn't belong to us. It's energy that belongs to life. And so allowing the pain to flow through, recognizing that it's part of this deeper flow that is coming towards us, coming through us, moving through us. So surrendering, not holding on to that deeper stream. And I think my biggest takeaway from the nest in this stream, and I continue to have insights and learnings, these years later, but is that suffering, the distinction between pain and suffering, is that suffering is where we're in pain on our own, where we're in pain in isolation. That's what makes pain unbearable. That's what turns pain into suffering. And that healing is pain in relationship, where we're in pain, we're still in pain, but we're not alone in our pain. We're in pain in relationship. And that changes everything. And a patient who said to me once, in such a moment, the pain is still there, but I can live with it now. So here we're going to do a pivot, and the pivot happened in August 2013, when my first grandchild, Elliot, was born. And that marked a shift for me, because I'd been very aware. I love nature. I have a very strong connection to the natural world. I've been blessed, as I say, to work with Indigenous teachers who kind of deepened that sense of reverence for the earth. And I was really, watching and horrified along with everyone else, as to what's happening, to our world, to the natural world, because of climate change and other destructive and extractive practices. And I was very aware of that. But what really personalized all of that was the birth of Elliot. And as I just began to feel and imagine what it was going to be like for this little being, and indeed through Elliot, all the little beings that are coming into our world, the world, as Joanna Macy calls it, of the great unraveling that's happening in so many of our life systems. What kind of future was he growing into? This is a corridor in the hospital where I work here in Santa Barbara, and Elliot's arrival in the world kind of marked a shift in my attention, my curiosity, my longing to help, from the microcosm of the bedside to the macrocosm, to what is unfolding around us in our world. And from humans in pain, and I might say I still love and work with humans, and indeed, for the next week, I'll be back in the hospital. So I'm semi-retired. I still do some locum work and weekends and so I but really this marked a shift from a primary, fairly exclusive attention to humans in pain to a world in pain. And, a desire to bring some of what I had learned, I'm learning at the bedside, to a world in need of palliative care, of some of what we learn by accompanying individuals that are facing an existential threat to a world that is facing an existential threat, and seeing that some of the wisdom and some of the teachings that come our way through the patients we work with, the clients we work with, the families we work with, what we learn in our own experience may be relevant more broadly and needed. When we look at, many of you may have seen, well, obviously, I think probably everybody's aware of the kind of migrant situation, this boat on its way from North Africa to Southern Europe, and this photograph taken shortly before this particular boat capsized, and many of the people you see here didn't survive that. Or we look at, we know what's happening to young girls in Afghanistan who, are being denied an education. When we look at the wars that are unfolding in the Ukraine, in Sudan, and the famine associated with it, and of course, what's unfolding at the moment in Gaza and Israel. When we look at our world, when we look at the clear cutting of our forests, when we look at, I live in a part of the world where we've had to evacuate our home 3 times because of wildfires coming down the mountains from behind where we live into the town, threatening our homes, burning some homes. We look at the melting of our ice caps, the droughts, the floods. That sense of moral distress, which is described first, as I understand it, in the nursing literature, but that sense of being in a situation where we internally feel there's something really wrong about what's happening, that we're part of that because of our situation, but because of the situation we're in, we're actually impotent to do anything to make a difference. So we see something that's wrong, we know it's wrong, but we can't do anything about it. That's what generates moral distress, and over time moral distress syndrome. And we look at what's unfolding in our world, and I think this is perhaps one of the main generators of burnout that's so prevalent, not just in healthcare, but in our in the wider world. We experience compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue, where we're present to an individual who is suffering, who is traumatized, but we are secondarily traumatized. And the kind of compassion fatigue, as you all know, is more appropriately described as secondary or vicarious, secondary traumatic stress or vicarious traumatization. So that's what Richard Harrison was addressing when he talked about exquisite empathy, that if we're present simply with our normal human empathic response, but without that kind of layer of mindfulness to allow us to sort of self-monitor, that brings some mitigation and protection, we're very vulnerable over time, as I experienced, to chronic vicarious traumatization. And the endpoint of all of these occupational stress and life stress situations is burnout. And we really are facing a global pandemic of burnout. This was a meta-analysis published in JAMA in 2018. So this was before COVID, but it was an analysis of 182 studies involving over 100,000 physicians from 45 countries, and over a 17-year period from 1991 to 2018. And there was a prevalence of burnout among all those physicians of 67%. Another study published in 2022 by Asana looked at over 10,000 knowledge workers across 7 countries and found approximately 70% of people experienced burnout in the prior year. So we're talking about a global phenomenon, at the root of which is disconnection. And that's the tragedy, because these symptoms of exhaustion, of dissociation and disconnection and lack of personal accomplishment are all symptoms of that retreat into behind the shield, which has become the stone, which has become ossified, which has disconnected us in those internal attempts to protect over time against the chronic flow of pain that's coming towards us. So what I realize is that self-care as we know it, or what we might call self-care 1.0, is simply not enough. We need something more. We need to rethink self-care. Not to abandon traditional self-care, not to abandon traditional self-care combined with mindfulness. Those are extremely valuable and will be protective in many situations. But they're not enough for our world and what's happening around us. And it raises the question, how can we stay present and not retreat into overwhelm and apathy and disconnection? How can we stay present to a world on fire without burning out? And for me, nature has pointed the way and continues to point the way. And Janet mentioned my book, The Nest in the Stream. And so the nest in the stream is one of a number of stories that I tell in this book about how nature has taught me to be with pain. But that model of the nest in the stream is one that I live with and continue to gain from and benefit from. But here's another metaphor for another way of being with pain, a more resilient way of being with pain. This is a redwood forest north of where I live here in Santa Barbara. Traveling up Highway 1 on the coast, one travels through an area called Big Sur, which is just the most majestic part of the world, where the mountains literally kind of just drop sheerly into the Pacific, and very sacred part of the world to Native peoples. Very beautiful part of the world. And there, during COVID, there was an area up there where my wife and I were lucky enough to be able to travel to and do some writing. And that's where I wrote my book, Becoming Forest. It's literally sitting among these redwoods. Every word in that book was written outdoors in nature. And many of them among these very redwoods we see here. So this was in August of 2020. And when I came back just a few months later in December, this is what it looked like. A wildfire had swept through the mountains of Big Sur and devastated a lot of the forest there, including a lot of the redwoods, and including this particular redwood that you see here on the right. This stump broken midway through its trunk, just charred, like the ashen background, all the leaves burned. So this is how it was in December 2020. So I wasn't able to visit again for about 18 months. But in May of 2022, when I revisited and I went back to that particular burnt stump, this is what I found. These shoots, these redwood shoots, were sprouting up from the root bed of the redwood, and were bursting out of the trunk of the redwood. And so for me, this just filled me with awe and amazement as I stood there watching it. And what I kind of recognize here is what I like to call deep resilience, that this redwood was resilient, and its resilience came from its deep rootedness. Not only were its roots deep, but even deeper than the roots is this incredible mycorrhizal network, which is linking all the trees in the forest, so that the nutrients from the healthy trees, the surviving trees, can actually feed the damaged tree, and kind of signals and information moving back and forth. And this redwood had survived because of its underground rootedness in this deep web. And so coming back to how can we be with our world in pain? How can we be with a world on fire without burning out? How can we be with the tsunami of suffering that is our world in so many ways? And I think that to survive the relentless tsunami of suffering, we need, as the nest teaches, to let it flow through us. That brings us actually paradoxically into deeper connection, to let it flow through us, our feet rooted in what isn't afraid and what doesn't die. Our feet rooted like the roots of the redwood in this incredible web of life that we are an integral part of, despite our delusion of separateness that we all live with so much of the time. And perhaps this is what self-care 2.0 actually looks like. Not that we don't need self-care 1.0, but we need a wider circle, a wider understanding. In addition to those protective practices of self-care 1.0, we need to find, whatever this means for us as individuals, we need to find our ways of tapping into deep resilience. And so a final metaphor for deep resilience. And this is, as you can see here, a glass of water, cup of water, and that's salt in the teaspoon next to it. And so if one can imagine that somehow our heart is like that glass of water, if we try and hold that spoon of salt, if we put that spoon of salt into that cup of water and stir it, if we try and hold it all on our own, it's going to be unbearably salty and undrinkable, and we're going to suffer. Whereas if we take that same spoon of salt and we walk to the edge of this vast mountain lake, and we put that spoon of salt into the water, and we then taste the water, the salt is undetectable. We can't taste it. Pain loses its sting when it's held in a bigger container. And so the question this brings up is, how can we be that wild mountain lake to another in pain, to a world in pain? What does that mean for us? How can we do this? How can we live this? How can we embody this? And that's a very individual question. It's a question for each of us to ask if we want to, and to try and find an answer to for ourselves. But, from the great wisdom traditions, and from a lot of research, including another paper, and actually, Jeanette, I'll send you afterwards both these papers that I'm referring to here. One is Richard Harrison's paper, and the other is a paper by Balfour called Healing Connections. And very briefly, what that paper is, a paper where they looked at 20 individuals at the end of life, similar demographics in every way, except that 10 of those individuals were identified as thriving, 10 of those individuals were identified as being miserable and unhappy. And again, did qualitative research and interviewed and found commonalities, and found, in essence, that those that were thriving in adversity were those that had healing connections with themselves, with others, with the phenomenal world, with ultimate reality, however they understood and experienced that. Whereas the individuals who were miserable and rated their quality of life as very poor were individuals who were isolated in their pain, didn't have those healing connections. So it's a wonderful paper and a very important one. But what that shows is that relationships, places, activities, practices that bring us into a bigger context than what Alan Watts calls our skin encapsulated egos, coming doorways into that, and then resting in that, and maybe over time that becoming a new basis of operation for how we are with others and our world. And our intention in doing so matters, that we are entering that doorway into deeper rootedness and connection with the intention to relieve suffering, our own, others, our worlds. Intention matters. So the question I want to leave you with to ponder and to maybe bring with you into the discussion in a little bit is just to think about, what is your doorway into the wholeness that's already there, that deeper living web that we are an integral part of? What is your particular doorway there? Your particular doorway to deep resilience, and how much is it part of your life? So that's it. Thank you. And that's Becoming Forest, and those connections are ones perhaps Jeanette will also share with you if you wanted to. My website has a number of guided practices, like the little one I'm just about to lead you in. And then a new website, becomingforest.com, is just beta testing at the moment, but it is live. So I would like to just lead you now in a short practice. If you, obviously, an invitation, if it's something you'd like to do, it's just 10 minutes, a guided meditation practice to try and give you a little taste of a doorway into our wider, deeper identity as interbeings, as Thich Nhat Hanh puts it, the Zen Buddhist teacher. We're not just human beings, we are interbeings. We're not just little billiard balls. We're more like waves on an ocean, or that mycorrhizal web. So just invite you to find your meditation posture. Just maybe sitting with your feet on the ground, your seat on the chair, straight spine, soft shoulders, soft belly. Closing your eyes. Allow your awareness to drop down into your body. And allow your body to drop down into the earth. Into those sensations of contact between your feet and the ground, your seat and the chair. Sensations of firmness and solidity. Just notice, sense into that contact between your body and the ground, your body and the earth. When you're ready, allow your awareness to rise up, filling the whole space of your body, from the soles of your feet to the crown of your head, mindfully aware. And as you're mindfully aware within your body, I invite you to notice where you're most aware of the movement and sensations of breath. Maybe in the rise and fall of your belly or your chest. Maybe in the subtle flow of air moving in and out of your nostrils. Wherever you're most aware of the movement and sensations of breath, allow your awareness to alight on the movement of breath, like a feather on a wave that rises with the rising breath, fall with the falling breath. And I invite you to notice everything about the rising breath, all the way through the rising breath. To notice everything about the falling breath, all the way through the falling breath. And I invite you to feel everything about the rising breath, all the way through the rising breath. To feel everything about the falling breath, all the way through the falling breath. Rising breath, falling breath. And if you notice your mind has been carried away with thoughts or distractions, as soon as you notice this, let go of the thought, relax, allow your awareness to fall back into your body, to alight once more on the gentle rise and fall of the body's breathing. Now, as your body continues to breathe, I invite you to open your eyes and to see before you this leaf, to bring all your attention to the leaf, noticing its shape, how it's catching the light, its little veins, how its stem connects it to the stalk, branch, how it's hanging there in space. As you continue to look at leaf, I invite you to allow your awareness to drop down into your body and to notice once more the gentle rise and fall of your body's breathing. And I invite you to gently close your eyes, bringing all your awareness, all your attention to this gentle rise and fall of the body's breathing. And know that your breath, your breathing, is not just yours. As your body rises with the inhale, you're receiving oxygen from leaf. As your body falls with the exhale, you're releasing carbon dioxide to leaf. Your breathing in is leaf's breathing out. Your exhale, leaf's inhale. Your breath, your breathing is a reciprocal dance between the leaves of your lungs and the lungs of the leaf. You are alive because of this dance. And this little leaf is this little leaf because of this dance. So allow yourself to feel your breath. Feeling your breath. You're feeling what your interdependence with leaf, with tree, with forest actually feels like. Just a few moments, allow your awareness to be carried in this effortless, reciprocal flow. You don't have to do anything. Your body is breathing all by itself. Kabir says, something inside me has reached to the place where the earth is breathing. Allow yourself to be carried in this silent, effortless, reciprocal flow. Thank you all.
So much, Michael.
You're welcome.
That was a wonderful talk and a really helpful exercise at the end. Wow. I'm wondering what we want to do. If we break into small groups, we probably won't have very long for our opportunity to ask questions or give reflections on how Michael's talk has impacted on us. So I wonder how people feel about going straight into the kind of plenary stage of things. Would that feel all right, or would we feel that we've been missing out on the small group part? I don't know how we take a poll. What do the other people from the project group think? And Michael, what do you think? How can we best move this forward? Any thoughts?
I think my sense is, I mean, I'm sorry, I kind of talked a little bit too long, but
not at all.
I'd love to, I think maybe to open to discussion. I'd love to hear what people think and hear some of your thoughts and reflections. Yeah, that would be just
that's my feeling too. And don't feel you've talked too long. I mean, it was perfect. What you gave us was absolutely wonderful. So yeah, don't feel that you've talked too long. Okay, so shall we open it to the floor, and Rachel, I hand over to you at this point, I think. And anyone who has questions can also put them in the chat if they don't want to ask them in person.
Yeah, I will just stop the recording, which is what we usually do, if that's okay.